welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's 30,000 subscriber special episode is the next installment of the incredible series by Michael G. Lockhart. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR? And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Bloody Bones and Green Eyes. Jim Broxton. Let's get straight into that. TJ and Cassie rushed to Uncle Jim's side. The elder Broxton obviously chafed about having to sit in a wheelchair. "I have a broken arm," he insisted, "but my legs are just fine. Take a look." At which he pointed and tugged up the leg of his trousers. Yet when his great niece and nephew approached, he stood and did his best to embrace them with his sound appendage. "So, you come to rescue the old man again, eh?" he rasped. "And get me out the clutches of these white-coated, masked fiends?" He spoke the last in a tone that indicated that he'd been only partly serious. And Terry Ann rolled her eyes and then took her turn for a hug. "No wonder they called to have us come get rid of you." She laughed and kissed the old man on his cheek. "Oh, that's a lot of loving. Maybe I should break a limb more often," he grinned. "Well, technically, you didn't break it. That booger squatch guy in the ugly suit did." Cassie smirked. Jim sobered for a moment. "Speaking of that, how are you, Terry Ann? That's a hell of a thing. We all know you were the hero, but you really haven't had any time to process what happened, what you were forced to do." Terry Ann assumed a pensive look. "I know it was necessary, but I just can't feel good about it. I haven't really sorted my feelings on it." And Jim nodded. "Likely you'll be sorting those for the rest of your days. I sure do that." He trailed off and grew silent for a moment. "At least you have a full-on driver and less distracted co-pilot." He grinned at TJ and Cassie in turn, and then winked at Cassie, who blushed. "Yes, I noticed. No earbuds or flying thumbs. Not even a device on you, unless you're hiding it behind your back." Cassie shook her head. "No, sir. I paid attention and thought about it. It hurt my feelings, but after I got done being butso." She glanced at her mother in case she was to be reproved. Well, apparently not. "I realized you were right. Best to learn to get by and then learn to use tech as a luxury, rather than a wheelchair." She giggled at her wits, and her great-uncle favored her with a wry smile in return. "Good one, but I believe that's a crutch. Now, will you please get me out of this place?" And he flashed his yellow teeth through his white beard. "Happy birthday to you." The group of family and friends, most of whom were as close as family, applauded TJ and blew out all 16 of his candles. There was a great deal of crosstalk and laughter, and general jovial mood descended over the group gathered at the Broxton home. In all the excitement, they'd almost forgotten TJ's birthday. Uncle Jim sat next to Will Jenkins, one in a massive cast and sling, the other in a massive brace with the metal pins. Each sported his unique grin, and TJ noted that they could easily be related, two of a kind. Eventually, the festivities reached a quiet phase, and the revelers sank into seats around the patriarch of the family. It was what happened at every gathering with Uncle Jim. At some point, anyone who knew him wanted to hear him tell his stories. Even when the stories weren't that great or didn't really have a point, it was fun to listen to the man. He knew how to spin a yarn. He also knew his role and took a drink of his spiked iced tea before he assumed a serious look. "Well, y'all know, at least most of you, the tale of the latest 2 green eyes. Yet, other than a couple of mentions, I never told you about old green eyes. Nor how I ended up working where I did." He looked at TJ and Cassie in turn. And 1965, I was 15 and your grandpa Carl had just turned 12. We had an older sister, Roxy May, and a younger sister and brother, Thelma and Pete. I'm sure you recall all of those names. And the kids nodded dutifully. It started with a dead yearling calf, nice and fat young fella, a real loss. Dad didn't look too closely. Anyone could tell that an animal had got at it. He assumed it was a cougar or maybe a pack of wolves or coyotes. It had definitely been partially eaten and dragged up under the big tree. And there were paw and claw marks all around the carcass, so something fought over it, regardless of what killed it first. Dad set Carl and me to ranging around the property. We always had those miles of woods, but back then we didn't have any close neighbors, so it was no trouble to hike around toting long guns and no one would cry about it. We looked for days, trying to take out our old coon dog Rex, but he kept getting sidelined, and when he found some big tracks, he just balked and laid on the ground. And that was the first time we heard the scream. His eyes grew distant, and he gave a slight shiver. And nothing quite like that sound. To we boys who had always been told those woods were plagued with all manner of boogers and squatches, and all kinds of haints, well, it was more frightening than anything we'd faced. Old Rex stood and took off, pulled his lead right out of Carl's hand. He ran away from the sound and towards the house. Yeah, went straight underneath the porch. We looked at one another without a word. We headed that direction too. Whatever was out there sounded big. Bigger than a 12 gauge with odd 4-shot and a 22 rifle could handle. Dad, he told us to stay in the house that night. There was no problem. We added plumbing back in 1955, so no need to journey to the outhouse in the dark. That night, we heard the cries of a couple more times, but not close to the house. The next day, we armed up and we set out with Dad too, go see the damage. It wasn't too bad. One of the pigs, the feral hogs out in the forest, these days got their starters on his pigs. This time, we could see the pug marks very clearly. Dad had obviously worried. The tracks were a big cat, but too big for a cougar. He didn't say much to us on the way back to the house, just told us to stay around the house and not to go outside, unarmed. He told Mom and the other 3 stayed inside, except for daylight chores near the buildings, until he said otherwise. The next day, he had to work the sawmill. It was a way to keep a steady flow of hard cash, and he did it 3 days a week. Carl and I sat up most of the nights, but there were no cries. We thought maybe the thing had moved on like a thief in the night. We fell asleep right there in the living room, at least until a bit after 3 in the morning. Uncle Jim glanced around at Cassie and TJ, and Natalie, who had slided up next to TJ on the love seat. He cocked an eyebrow for just long enough to make them both blush in embarrassment. I'm not sure what awakened me. Carl snoozed on peacefully. I walked out onto the porch and stared into the darkness under the trees. And the moon was bright enough to create a grey light around the yard and cast some moon shadows. In those days, there was no light pollution nearby, so the stars were bright, and I could see into their depths until they faded into the light that we called the Milky Way. And the air was a little crisp but refreshing. And then I saw them. The twin green lights out among the branches. At first, they looked like gigantic lightning bugs, but the glow was larger and steadier, more sinister than any mere bug, and side by side. And then they blinked. Uncle Jim jumped a little and caused the others to flinch along with him. And that broke the spell. I hurried back on inside and picked up the 12 gauge, now loaded with double ARP buckshot. And when I got back to the porch, there was nothing but darkness. I hadn't noticed quite earlier, but shortly small critters started to chirp and click and buzz once more. An owl hooted nearby and like to have made me wish I was wearing brown pants. He flashed a quick grin. Needless to say, I didn't get much sleep after that. I decided not to tell Dad. I figured he was worried enough and knew that we needed the money he would make at the sawmill. He handed me his father's old Winchester 30-30 and a box of cartridges and told me to teach Carl how to use it, but to go no further from the house than the cow pond. Well, naturally, I did as instructed. First thing after we finished our chores, Carl picked it up with ease. He was a crack shot with his little .22, but it was a bolt action. The Winchester was a lever action and required more strength and emphasis to operate. Once he got used to that difference, he was able to nail the targets easily. Apparently, we had awakened something from its beauty sleep because we heard a roaring scream. I was from back in the woods a piece, but definitely sounded angry. And since I was dumbass kid with a dumbass temper, I got determined to finish what we were doing and told Carl to fire a few more rounds at the target. All the while, I watched the tree line, my old double-barrel shotgun at the ready. Carl's shooting skills degraded a little. I could tell he was nervous. If I had any sense, I would have been skittish right along with him. I told him he'd done well, and we could go back to the house. On the way, we tromped along and made a little noise to keep the snakes out of our path. And then something out among the dark trunks and intermittent water greenery caught my attention. An inky shadow stalked along beside and just behind us. I didn't say anything to Carl, but I eased back a little to stay between that shady booger cat and my little brother. I kept pace, never got closer, and never dropped behind until we made it to the porch. I stopped and stared back at it, and Carl noticed that I'd stopped, and I hadn't heard whatever he had said. Something about cornbread for dinner. I saw those eyes again, glistening this time, just a little glow from the shadows from inside the deeper silhouette of the thing's head. I started to walk backwards towards the porch and told Carl to go on inside. Unfortunately, he only climbed the stairs and then turned back while he readied the rifle. I had started to raise my shotgun when the big head lowered for a moment, and then a black streak shot from the brush and right at me. He leaned forward and used his good arm and hand to make a clawing motion, like that of a large animal that dug in on its toes as it rushed forward. Fear could be a friend or a foe. Because I was startled, I didn't get the barrel up as high as I intended before I cut loose with both barrels of buckshot. It worked out, since I hadn't understood just how quickly such a creature could move. I managed to ding it with a few pellets. If I'd fired when and where I intended, I'd have shot completely over it. As is, I had it on top of its hindquarters, and its back legs dipped, just a moment, and it paused and let out a startled shriek. Well, about then, your Grandpa Carl, who started firing when I did, finally got a hit when the thing stopped. I had spun around and rushed back into the trees with just a hint of a limp. We fired on until we were out of rounds, but didn't hurt much other than some tree bark and leaves. And Dad, he wasn't sure whether to be angry with us for wasting ammunition or proud that we'd been able to hit the thing at all. He confirmed that there was blood on the trail, but wanted to wait until we had a full day of light before we went out to look for a carcass or, worst case, a wounded big kitty. He talked about getting some of his sawmill buddies to help. We didn't hear a thing all night, and we hoped and prayed for the demise of that monster in our woods. At breakfast, Dad told us that he would go to the mill and gather a hunting posse. He told Carl and me to stay at home and guard the others. All of us had chores, and Thelma and Pete were getting a little stir-crazy. Roxy had been escorting them on her normal rounds. That morning, Carl went with them. I stayed on the porch and checked over my shotgun and replayed my mistakes from the encounter. I hadn't fired a single barrel at a time and had reloaded as quickly as I should have. I remained standing and spoiled some of Carl's shots while putting myself on unnecessary danger. I should have knelt or stepped to one side. While I was still dwelling on my ineptitude, when I saw a familiar 7-feet-long shadow move from behind the chicken coop. The girls were inside collecting eggs. Pete and Carl stood outside and talked. Everything went into slow-motion mode. I pulled the butt off the stock into my shoulder and took aim. Pete saw the large figure that managed to sneak up behind Carl, and his face drained of blood. Carl had barely registered the look when the cat gathered its obviously injured rear legs to spring. Uncle Jim looked around at the enraptured expressions on the party-goers. They were enthralled with the tale and wanted to know how it ended. Yet he gave them one of the dramatic pauses that he so enjoyed. When he resumed, he did so with an appropriately increased volume. Blam! Clickety-blam! Clickety-shack! Shick-shack clunk blam! Pause with the last round. I unloaded 3 rounds into that sumbitch. I had jumped when the first one hit, but not at Carl. It made a mid-leap to face the new threat. The next round took it to the face, and the last in between its shoulders. It happened in a blur, but Carl still managed to get the rifle into play and plant a couple of rounds into the thing's spine. He missed with a few more. I had never finished its leap to anywhere, just crumpled and lay there heaving. My ears were ringing, and so I didn't register at first that the girls had run from the chicken coop out into the yard, screaming all the while. Pete ran with them. He was just a little fella. Chickens didn't lay for a week after that. I started walking towards the injured cat, completely the opposite of what Dad had told me to do. I reloaded the empty barrel as I walked. Carl had his rifle trained on the big critter, but had not moved nor tried to replenish the internal magazine. And the monster cat laid on his side and heaved in deep, slow breaths. Its eyes were closed, those terrifying green orbs. There's something about an injured being. Makes it hard to just shoot, at least until when you get past those silly, suicidal instincts. And when I came close, I slided around towards Carl, who was still frozen. And that's when I felt, not saw, I felt the claws rake my lower leg. The teeth enveloped my boot and started to close in like a vice. I let loose a blast into the cat's ribs and Carl emptied the remaining rifle rounds into the belly. I fell over backwards and looked into those eyes, so full of rage and hate for me, full of murderous intent. He grew quiet for a moment and looked down at his leg. He lifted up the pants to expose his scarred calf. I had died, still trying to take out the things that had hurt it. I kicked to the head, trying to tear loose my foot, pulled my foot right out of the boot and kept scrambling backwards. It took a moment to realize that the big feline was dead. Its eyes had remained open and staring and started to glaze before I was able to start shaking with a released adrenaline. A good while before I was able to look around, much less stand. The whole family was proud of us, of course. Pete followed me around for the rest of the time that I lived at home. When I left, he started to follow Carl. He was the nicest of us boys in the end, and Carl was the best. His eyes grew a little glassy and wet. Will handed him a tissue from a box on the end table. I'll tell the rest. How I got my job with DMT Solutions another time. Maybe tomorrow. TJ looked across the breakfast table the next morning. It was just the two senior Broxton men. No one else had awakened. Uncle Jim, I've been worried that Mum would get all depressed or have nightmares the way Dad did after his time in the service. She's taken it pretty good, having had to kill that booger squatch guy. He grew quiet once more and returned his attention to the tabletop. Jim, who had begun to follow the indirect way that the boy broached important subjects, especially ones fraught with emotion, caught the youngster's eye. Well, your stabs killed him as much as her blasts. He just hadn't finished bleeding out yet when his big scary ass stumbled out of those woods in the dark and right at your ma. How do you feel about that? TJ shrugged and concentrated hard on using his gaze to drill a hole into the wall, just above his great-uncle's head. Funny. I felt bad in a way that we killed the old cat. The second one, for you. I've been mad at it, but I don't like killing when I don't have to. Or like you said about the first old cat, how you didn't want to shoot it when it was wounded. But I didn't see that guy in the woods as a person, just a threat. A monster from the shadows that attacked us. I only thought about it afterwards. I tried to feel bad for him, for his family, for whoever might miss him. But the more we learned about him, and the more I thought about it, Why he was in our woods, I just couldn't make myself feel bad. He wasn't a kind person to use his size and strength for any good, only to hurt other people. And so, the only sleep I've lost has been wondering about your career. About those men who helped with Green Eyes the Third? Uncle Jim nodded. A smart way to look at things. Most grown men struggle with that. The ones who've been to war or had to defend themselves, or someone else with deadly force. A few people, maybe 3% I've heard it argued, can do what we do and keep death in perspective. The old tyrant is our friend when the need arises, but we don't want to hang out with him all the time. We also don't want to wallow in pointless guilt. That big fella made his own choices. He was no child, and I doubt anyone could have done much to force him to act. You have a few talents, and this is one of them. Your dad had it to a lesser extent. He felt more remorse than was necessary. But then he fought for other warriors and soldiers, folks he could respect, even if he detested their ideology. Easier to take out crooks or people whom you can convince yourself to hate. That evening, the inner circle, who had been involved with the DMT Solutions teams, gathered in the living room. Everyone was anxious to hear Uncle Jim's tale of how he ended up working for the mysterious contractor. Naturally, the younger members of the audience wanted more details on just what DMT Solutions was and what they did. And they settled, and Uncle Jim cleared out a little of his usual rasp. If you recall last Labor Day weekend, I told everybody about the incident with the big black cat on the bridge at Ben's Branch, just below Black Cat Ridge. I never said why I was down that way in the first place. It was 1958 when that happened, just a few months before I turned 17. I was a Pearl Harbor day baby, and so my life started off with turmoil and sadness. Not that our family knew anything about it for several days. They were busy with a new baby, and radios were still a luxury item. We wouldn't have gotten a signal out this way anyway. I know I'm rambling, but it's important to know how people used to live and understand how things used to work. It wasn't that long ago, still within the span of a human lifetime. I left home about a year after your grandpa Carl and I took out old Green Eyes. Going through that mess, wanting to finish high school, and in general having a case of the itchy foot, I took a job at the sawmill down that way and stayed with my Aunt Linda and Uncle Edward while I went to school. I had big notions of going from there on to college. He rolled his eyes. I had a few life adventures, and eventually I moved on. I ended up with a bachelor's degree. It took several years, and I had to work, and in the meantime, I switched jobs and became a game warden. The state had opened a park in the piney woods near Huntsville, and so I could work and go to school. I had a nice mix of terrain, hills, trees, pastures, lakes, and swamps. Wonderful place. His eyes grew distant for just a moment at the memories of his youth. Anyway, I done got me one of them high-dollar educations. He pulled a goofy face and lowered his tongue and rolled his eyes around alarmingly. The move got the grins and sniggers he'd hoped to elicit. By then it was 1966. I was closing in on the ripe old age of 25 and got into a pretty bad scrape with some poachers. They were out, not only on off-season, but in a restricted area. There were 4 of them with rifles, of course, and 2 of them had pistols. And there were a few brush knives. You get the picture. They were well-armed and ornery because none of them cared to go to jail. It got ugly, and I wasn't ready for it. The only things that saved me were that, 1, they didn't use their rifles to shoot me from a distance, and 2, they didn't surround me or cut off my escape route. And most importantly, 3, they underestimated what one man could do against 4 if he really wanted to live and have some decent instruction. And I really wanted to live. I had a wife, your great aunt Emma Jean. He choked up a little. And your cousin, little Gina. I was just a few weeks old. Edwina would come along and a bit later. I saw where it was going, and I moved first. All I had was my sidearm and a revolver back in those days, and a big side knife. And that's the 4th factor I took them by surprise. The one out front who did the talking, loud talking, elbow to the chin, dropped him. Oh, mouth. I back-fisted the next one in the side of his jaw, and the last two had finally realized what was happening and started awkwardly shift their long guns. I kicked the twin field goal with one and took hold of the barrel of the fourth one's rifle. That didn't go so well. He fired the thing. I had redirected the barrel, but idiot number 2 was on his hands and knees and on the new trajectory. Round took him up in the lower right lung and came out his upper left lung, tore up some hard along the way, and so, well, he never got back to his feet. I burned the crap out of my hands, though, but it took the idiot number 4 out of the fight for long enough. I drew my pistola and stepped around to cover the 3 stooges. Unfortunately, number 1 had recovered enough to grasp his rifle and start to raise it. I shot him in the face, and the spray of blood and tissue, well, let's just say I once again experienced time dilation, like when old Green Eyes charged. This time, I had tunnel vision and audio exclusion. I couldn't hear anything but a ghost roar coupled with a little tinnitus. I looked over at number 4. About this time, his look of shock from having just killed my friend started to transform into one of outrage. I shot him in the chest a couple of times. More blood and material. Well, there was plenty of backsplash, so I was getting covered in gore. He collapsed on the spot. Jim paused and studied the floor at his feet for a moment. Cassie leaned forward and was about to encourage him, but he held up his hand. Thank you, sweetie, but this part is hard to tell. A life-changing moment. He inhaled a deep breath. Well, number 3 had mostly stopped coughing and clutching at himself. He managed to get up onto his knees and raised his hands. I wasn't having it. Some bitch had threatened my life and, by extension, the lives of my family. I put my last 3 rounds into his chest and face. I turned and vomited and then kicked his rifle over near his body. I was shaking with that post-adrenaline fall. I managed to reload my weapon and get back to my car with this big honking radio. Well, the rest is just court stuff, an internal review. I was hailed a hero for my deadly encounter. I didn't feel like one, as you can imagine. The killer never bothered me. He glanced up at TJ and they shared a meaningful look, which made him proud of the young man. The murder did, though. It didn't sit right with the badge, and I couldn't look at my sweet wife and baby girl. I told Imogene, of course, and she was understanding and reminded me that I had done what was right in a dangerous situation. My nerves had to have been too high-strung to do otherwise, and she assured me that one of the reasons she loved me was my sense of honor. Not tooting my own horn, just saying. And he finished a little gruffly. Anywho, there was this whole war thing going on in Southeast Asia. In a way, it projected all around the world. I'll tell you more about that later. Maybe above your pay grades. He gave a fleeting yellowed grin. I decided to enlist and to get away for a while. Imogene didn't like it at all, of course. I was already away too much at the time of my current job. It was obviously dangerous. Yet, she came around to it, and when she saw that I wasn't getting any better, I've been having nightmares and bouts of anger. I was still scared that I'd lose my temper and, well, I needed to be away from my ladies while I got my head straight. And by then, we were closing in on 1967. A little over a year later, I was an airborne ranger and had been shaken and baked into Butterbar second lieutenant by way of officer candidate school. That was my punishment for finishing first in all my basic schools. No good deed goes unpunished. My team was out on LRRP, that's Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol, out looking for commies in black pajamas. I didn't find many until Tet Offensive in January 1968, and then suddenly we were up to our eyeballs in North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong guerrillas. Seemed like everybody hated us all at once. Well, it was messy and there were too many tales to tell. Most of them more interesting than mine. Now, once the initial storm settled and bodies were strewn all over the little peasant country and its neighbors, a new terror began. Started when one of our allies, a little turd named Phuc Duc, Stop giggling. It doesn't translate the same in English. He and his team claim to have found a village with some oddly mangled corpses, like something or someone had eaten them. Food was scarce enough that cannibalism wasn't out of the question, but none of this sounded right. A few of us suspected that old Foo, Duck, planned to sell us out to the NVA or VC, and we proceeded to the village on high alert. And sure enough, the corpses showed signs of being eaten. There were only a few. The rest of the populace had likely fled from whomever or whatever did this. My fears about Duck turned out to be true as well. He disappeared shortly after we had arrived. One of my guys was watching, and we started to follow him into the jungle. We had all entered the trees when we heard a roar and a scream, all mingled together and just ahead of us. And there were other, less pleasant sounds, wet sounds, followed by screams and random gunfire. We moved in to address the ambush, and the crazy roar forgotten in the ensuing shootout. We mainly had to shoot them in the back since several had already fled. A few others had rallied, but they were no match for the Green Giants. We cleaned their clocks. Afterward, we found old Duck, and he had been plucked. Throat torn out, neck snapped, and body raked by big claws. He had been dragged a few feet, but then tossed aside like a bloody ragdoll. There was a large chunk of meat missing from his left thigh. Something like a giant Morris the Cat wanted tenderloin for Din-Din. We had to stop and explain about Morris the Cat commercials from the 70s. Well, there had been a few pug marks, but we were still focused on the human foe and had to contact the main unit. It was an interesting side tale, but the skirmish had been more exciting from our point of view. I soon forgot about it as just a random attack by a big cat that was scared by all the crazy humans in its territory. And then we got a report that the locals had started to speak in fear about a monster that lurked in the jungle and missing animals, and then of course, missing people. Eventually, we got the uninviable task of acting like a liaison and helping to resolve the disappearances. Apparently, being a game warden in North America somehow made me an expert on Asian big cats. I took a team and an interpreter, Fang-tastic. No, I'm not making it up. We took a guy named Fang to look for a big cat. Now, he was considered reliable, and I trusted him as far as I could trust anyone in that hostile population. After a few interviews, we figured out that it was a tiger. The stripes, they gave it away. It was big and likely pretty old. The activity and noise from the recent uptick in the conflict, combined with more bodies to scavenge and its reduced energy from old age and bloat, the thing had a developed taste for Vietnamese food. He waited through the groans and eye rolls. The problem was, while I had an abiding interest in felines of the Panthera genus, I had hunted only one at that point, and in truth, it had hunted me. After a few discussions with more experienced minds, it seemed that the Indians had figured out the best method: remain safely on the back of an elephant in a nice howdah, a portable hunting stand. Problem was, we didn't have any elephants, and so we borrowed a couple of armored personnel carriers, ACPs, and crews. Imagine a heavy steel cracker box that sits on bulldozer tracks, painted green and fill it with soldiers, and voila, APC. They ain't super tall, but close enough for government type work. Problem was going to be going off-road with them. They could handle it, but old Tony the Tiger had decided that he liked to dwell in the thickest stands of trees and brush. And during our preparations, he managed to snag another villager, and apparently they were great. He paused again, his good finger raised like an iconic cereal mascot, and looked around, hopefully for laughter and maybe more groans. The crowd was old enough to get it, but Cassie spoke up first. I thought you said his name was Morris. It took a while to sort out the cartoon timelines and references, but eventually Jim got the story rolling again. Anyway, we used maps to triangulate the attack patterns. The tiger was on a snack circuit, but it centered around one heavily forested wetland. It was going to be difficult to use the elephants, the APCs. We need to lure him or scare him up onto a high ground. The locals cooperated for once, and this was a common enemy. They slaughtered a pig and hung it in the middle of the village. The people were either in hiding or with us. If the kitty cat didn't take the bait, then we'd have the villagers beat the brush and flush him out towards us. Kinda dumb on our part, wanting a tiger to charge us. It didn't go exactly as planned. First, he didn't take the bait. He was an animal, but not stupid. The beaters drove him out of his den, and we confirmed that part afterwards by finding the remains of some of the missing locals stashed away in his larders. Unfortunately, he didn't come straight for us. He tore through a couple of the pajama boys and escaped the encirclement. Boated right for the closest river. Now, before you think old Uncle Jim was a dumbass and outsmarted by a mere critter, I remind you that my team was still in the area. We feared that this might happen based on the anecdotes told by some of our actual allies, with of whom had been on a tiger hunt in his youth in India. The team spotted old Tony and fired at him. Not sure if anything hit him, but it caused him to panic. He ran straight back through the line of beaters and into a range of 50 cows on the APCs. It pretty much shredded him into striped burger meat. And the tower wasn't a huge thing. Again, there was a real war with people still going on, and so the story got buried among the many myths of the war. I finished my tour and went on home to my blushing bride. In the airport, as I was waiting at the taxi stand, my medals gleaming, beret popped tight, and a lean-looking man approached me. He introduced himself as Douglas. Apparently my fame as a big cat tamer had reached the lofty ears. He told me about a company that he and his wife had started back in 1964. Defense, Management and Technological Solutions Incorporated. There was more to the conversation, but he looked around and waggled his eyebrows. He got back to the chorus he'd hoped to hear. Above our pay grade. He grinned and nodded in satisfaction. Perhaps someday. Back then, they were still building as a company, and so the founders did much of the recruiting. I figured him as some military industrial complex type. I took his card, which just said Douglas, and had a phone number on it. All I wanted to do was get home to my ladies. It was the start of a new decade, and we had lives to live. In January 1972, we welcomed your cousin Edwina, and by then, I come to my senses and called Douglas. After some training and company indoctrination, he sent me to work on catcalls. Mainly feral tigers. I had some fun with some other assignments, but they are all classified in the company files. There was a sniffle and a snort from the back of the room near the kitchen door. Everyone turned, a little startled since no one had left the group and they had not expected anyone else to join. Uncle Jim grinned so widely that the rest thought his head might split wide. Ed, my darling girl. And he shuffled over to embrace her as best he could. She smiled with a much brighter and orderly dentation. Daddy, good to see you. I read the reports from the field agents. Shame on you. You should have told me you were badly hurt. I didn't want you putting any of that cobalt blue stuff on me. I know it works, but at my age, having a super arm would cause more harm than good. She snorted in earnest. Yeah, right. You'll outlive us all. Uncle Jim introduced the group one by one, and each squirmed a little as he or she came under the brazenly appraising gaze of Ed. And she was a grown-up, but still very attractive and fit, but it was her eyes. They penetrated hearts and souls and laid bare the inner workings of the young minds under review. After the introductions and interviews by Ed, she turned to her father. So, Daddy, did you tell TJ, Cassie, and Will about the most recent tiger hunt on Elephant Back? And Jim shook his head. No, we had a most welcome interruption. You want to tell it? She shook her own head and sank down next to him. No, Daddy. You are the storyteller in our family. Besides, you're also the big cat expert. The real one, that is. He looked around at the expectant faces. Oh, there's not much of a tale. Just, you remember how I told you about working as a game warden? Nods all around. Well, I was friends with one of the younger wardens, Don Davis. He eventually had a son who followed in his footsteps. rose all the way to the rank of captain. He waited for a moment and was rewarded with a chorus of "Mr. Davis," followed by comments on how he had been a friend of Travis Sr. and Billy before he promoted and moved to another district. "Well," he resumed, "Captain Davis is the one who recruited your fathers for the saber-toothed hawk hunt. If he had known how it would go..." He cleared his throat once more. "At some point, Travis told Captain Paul Davis about the ACP tiger hunt. Captain Davis suggested it was as a means to stop the mutant killer pigs. So, your dad not only joined in and served, he indirectly gave them the idea to work to end the terror. By the way, one of the victims was a temporary contract security guard for a DMTS facility, so they were keen to help. I hate to admit it, but the company played a part in recruiting your dads as well as Captain Davis. Fact is, your dads were both respected. We didn't know." After the rest of the company was gone and the kids had gone up to bed, Jim and Ed spoke for a while, out on the porch he so favoured for conversations. "So, what do you think of your cousins? I know you haven't had long or of a real assessment, but you usually know within the first few minutes," Jim rasped. Ed sat silently for a moment, organising her thoughts. "I think that they're a talented lot, except for that Natalie girl. Not stupid, but definitely not strong sort. At least not the kind of strength we need. She might be a distraction for the star, TJ. Cassie seems the most focused, and Will, I like that kid. He combines a good nature with intelligence, capability, and determination. That's my initial take." And Jim nodded. "Good. If you actually liked him, maybe he's worth helping. Even now? He can have the repair you offered me." Ed looked pensive. "We'll see. I have one more day I can spare to visit and continue the evaluations. Now, how about you? Once you get your wing back in shape, assuming that you truly won't let us help you with the Cobalt program, are you still going on the Yukon trip for your big 8-0? Author's note. Enough people commented that they wanted to know more about Uncle Jim's early adventures, and that this tale went from a short character background to what I hope was an entertaining yarn. I hope that any Vietnam vets in the audience will forgive any mistakes on my part. I tried to keep certain parts more generalised and thus more accurate, out of genuine respect for your service. I was in the army during the 1980s, and those who trained and led my peers and me were often Vietnam veterans. We all owed so much to them, to all of you. Yes, you will get the Uncle Jim Yukon adventure shortly. I'm finishing it after I send this to DMT, then taking a few days to edit. He already has another monster script that tells about Blue Jay's leg, among other appendages and body parts. You all get a bear growl. Regards, Michael. Wow, 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 wow. Another one. Wow. Absolutely wonderfully written. A tapestry of chills and spills and action-packed there. Always enjoy a big cat story. Very refreshing to hear the big cat genre. Thank you so much, Michael, for the incredible pen work. The rate that you write is absolutely superior to many of our peers. Like a machine at times. It's an absolute honour. Thank you so much. So glad you're a part of my journey. And speaking of journeys, guys, I just wanted to say a quick few words. Let you all know how I feel. Absolutely shocked and humbled and truly touched by the amount of support that has gone on over the last 3 years and 2 months. 30,000 subscribers, 30,000 people have smashed the subscribe button or hit the like button, and it's shocking. I've just never expected this type of success with the channel, or the speed of the growth of the channel, or the steadiness of the growth. It's been consistent, and it keeps me going. You know, it really does keep me hitting and punching for greater levels and raising the bar, hopefully, each and every time. You guys and girls, family and friends who have joined me on this phenomenal journey, I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support and words of ever-increasing love and belief in myself and the DMT Forest Fear family and team is truly touching, and it helps me so much I cannot express. My life has never been more rewarding in anything else that I've tried my hand to or accomplished. I never felt more sure of a direction for me to pursue in. And now I have a direction, I can pursue other related avenues to do with voice acting. All of this is only possible because of each and every one of you who took the time to say something or throat punch the notification bell. So, what now? Well, we've got the LBL first series book. I'm hoping to drop that around October, Halloween time, plus lots of other things to follow that. Of course, the Winlatter Forest Secrets, that will be the next published book, if not the second series of the LBL. Of course, once I finish writing that and amend any mistakes that a few of you have pointed out. I guess now we are truly on the road to 50k, but no matter what, I still remember each and every one of you from the very, very early days. It's so nice seeing familiar faces and profile names come up and say your nice kind words and talk about the journey that we've shared together for 3 years now, and I really do remember each and every one of you when you first came onto the channel, believe you me. Of course, an extra special thank you to my wonderful, beautiful Cryptid crew. You guys have really kept us floating for the last couple of months, I can admit that. Your support goes so far for us, and I really do hope to build more exclusive content for just the members area only. Had to unload some of it this week with my pattern with the kids at home off school. My son went back to school for all of a week and a half, and now he's on a 6-week holiday for the summer before he starts his secondary school, his senior years in education. So lots and lots going on. I will try and get back to as many comments as possible on the community post. I had a quick browse through them this morning with a cup of coffee, and guys, you brought a tear to my eyes. Thank you all so much. And above all, remember, be safe, not sorry. Ba-dow!